Hey there, this is Perch. I had the absolute pleasure to chat with Bryan Edward Hill about kind of his career, how he found his way into comics, talking about American Carnage, some of the books he's written, how politics and social issues are handled in comics, and how fans and creators can come together. And yes, a bit about his new book, Fallen Angels, coming up as part of the Dawn of X storyline. An absolutely incredible interview. This is a long video, it's like an hour. So I considered breaking this up into bits, but it's just, I don't want to tease you with 10 episodes of something. So bookmark it if you need to, but here is his conversation with Bryan Edward Hill. Again, absolutely amazing. Much thanks for him granting the interview, and you guys are going to absolutely love this. I'm on with Bryan Edward Hill, a creator who's got a lot of attention lately, got some amazing books out right now, and certainly fan favorite, I would say. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Yeah. Thanks for reaching out. This is great.
Well, I wanted to kind of go through some of the things you've done and just ask you a little bit about what you're doing, and then try and, of course, ask you a liture bit about the upcoming project you have coming. But it's certainly, I know there's some secrecy around it, so I hopefully don't say anything I shouldn't.
For sure.
So, kind of going into your background, I'm not sure everybody knows you're certainly an author. You've written comics, but you've been a screenwriter. You've done Titans, Ash vs. Evil Dead, Russian Specialist, more. You're on Zone 414. You're a musician, graphic designer. You've kind of done it all. So I've got to ask, how did you get to comics? Is this something you always wanted to do, or how did you land here?
Well, I was always into comics growing up. They were, um, kind of my most powerful reading experiences as a kid. But I never really thought I would write comics because there was no pathway. There was you could see a pathway if you wanted to draw them. But for writing, I just didn't know how that would work. So I didn't really give it professional time. And the reason why I dabble in so many different things is I went to NYU film school. Originally, I wanted to be a writer-director. That was the whole point. I was going to write and direct my own films. Well, what you learn from NYU, because they're a more independent-minded institution than I would say USC or UCLA is, you learn that you have to know things because you may not have the budget to afford experts, right? So if you wanted to design a poster for your short film, you had to learn some graphic design principles. If you wanted a good soundtrack for your movie, you might have to write it yourself. So, you just picked up the skills out of necessity, really. And while I was in New York, I met a bunch of comic book artists. There used to be a Starbucks on Astor Place in New York City, like downtown, right? And there, a bunch of artists would come down. This is back in the day when they would draw on paper, and they would have those mobile lighting tables. They'd be like an AC outlet. You plug it in, and the table closed, and they could draw on their huge vellum and all that. So I met a bunch of artists who were there working on pages, and like Chris Tabari was in there, Afua Richardson was there, Nelson Blake was there, Damian Scott was there. That's where I met LaShawn Thomas. So I got into this circle of artists, and that opened up comics to me professionally, but it still took a long time before anyone ever hired me to write anything. I had sold, I think, like 3 screenplays and had that Dolph Lundgren movie get made before I was ever viable in comics. So it's a weird game. I had another career.
Oh yeah,
when I had another career. Then they were like, "Oh, you should write comic books." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'll find the time." And that's how I wound up here.
And going on that, a lot of comic writers, you see interviews with them, and they say they want to get into movies or they want to get into shows, and you almost get the impression that comics are kind of a stepping stone to get to that next place. But you've been to that next place, and you're doing comics. Is it? Why do you think people look at the comics as almost kind of a lesser step? I mean, do you think there's something there?
Well, I think part of it is simply the finances.
Sure.
It's like Hollywood is very lucrative. Even when you're a low paid Hollywood creator, you're still paid pretty well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So getting to a living wage happens much faster I think, in Hollywood, if you can find the work, right?
Right.
With comics, because now everything is about pre-existing intellectual property. You don't see a lot of new things being developed for the small or the big screen. So a lot of new movies and television shows, they're coming from comic books. So there is a natural bridge there, but it's I don't know if working in comics is the fastest way to be a screenwriter or a television creator. I think writing good screenplays and creating some decent television shows on paper, at least writing some pilots and getting into that system, that's probably a more efficient way. If one wanted to actually work in the business of screenwriting or television writing.
I think
if you just wanted to sell. Yeah, it was easier. Frankly, Hollywood was easier than comics for me to get started. Comics was incredibly difficult for me to find any footing in, and I think honestly the headwind resistance that I felt from comics made Hollywood just feel much easier to me.
That's amazing.
Because like comics I could get to know, but Hollywood I would get to almost. And I'm like, well, I'll take an almost because I can convert that into a yes. But comics, it was always a full stop wall. Like, nope, no room at the end. Nope, carry on. So apologies for knocking. I believe they are cleaning the windows at my apartment. So there might be an occasional clang or something, and my little puggle is valiantly defending our home. From the usual window washers.
Well, I'm in the middle of a torrential Seattle rainstorm, so we have our coming from both sides.
Right on.
That's just amazing to me. I mean, and I think we're in such an interesting time period right now because you do have these comic book projects moving into movies. You have people like Mark Miller who's got to deal with Netflix. You see a lot of people taking that route. So there does seem like this connection point. But I find it fascinating, and you're not the only one. There's other people who've made the run to Hollywood and then come in, and I've heard that story before. That it's easier to go that way.
It is, yeah. I mean, I found it was. I think part of it is Hollywood is very much a business, right? It's when I say Hollywood, and I think this is important for your listeners to understand. Hollywood is not a single organism. Right, with all of the blood cells and organs sort of working with each other. Hollywood is a bunch of little fiefdoms. And, you tend to get work within a little group of creators and producers and financiers, and you work in that space, and then maybe you'll link up with somebody that can take you to like another little fiefdom, and then you work over there. But, you never really deal with all of Hollywood, right? With comics, the business model of comics is a little more hidden, I think, from the creative, right? I mean, in Hollywood, in my experience, we're always talking about budgets. We're always talking about, what the target market is, what audience are we looking to get, and it doesn't hamper creativity, but it lets you know in a semi-transparent way why decisions are being made. When it comes to comics, the business models are really hidden from you as a creator, as a freelancer especially. You just don't know why they think this will sell instead of that and how this will work. And, it takes 15 minutes to explain the distribution model of comics to a layman.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I think because of those reasons, in a lot of ways, I think Hollywood is more of a meritocracy than comics is. Mm-hmm. I think the obfuscation of just how revenue works and how profit works and what the metrics of what is successful and what is not are constantly shifting. It allows for other factors, I think, to be as dominant as one's ability to meet a creative need, meaning like your familiarity to the people that are the gatekeepers. There's a lot of hire my friend, in comics, and I'm not, slighting it because it's just kind of the way it works. it's very difficult for someone to show up with a piece of material, no matter how good it is, and have that piece of material be the thing that moves the goalposts, or moves the ball down the field, I should say. And Hollywood's a little different. Like if you wrote a great script, Perch, and it was just what they needed, it was a contained budget, high concept, 2-star, movie. Somebody out there might want to go ahead and mess with it simply because of the upside that they see, and if the story is good and the characters are good, oh yeah, we said this could work. In comics, it's just not that way. So it takes more time, I think, because you have to meet people and network, and there's a bit of there's a political element to it that
Sure.
is frankly not my nature. So
Yeah,
part
no,
of the
absolutely.
reason why I think one of the reasons why I had some difficulty, getting a foothold in the comics was I'm just terrible at that side of the game and just didn't really play very much, and that meant that I was usually just dealing with people who hadn't met me via email, that sort of thing. I didn't have a lot of face time with decision makers.
Well, and I wonder if, kind of to your earlier comment, the economics play a role here too, because in the tech industry, which is where I do some consulting on the side when I'm not dealing with comics, there is very much, you have big companies that are going to work on demand, similar to what you described with Hollywood. And you have
Mm-hmm.
smaller companies, startups. I mean, it's all about who you know there by necessity. There's just not enough money to necessarily go out and do a search and do those other things. So it's grab the closest person you know. And so you get these
Sure.
very tight knit communities. And I wonder if comics, there's a little bit of that plays there as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's to be honest, I still don't understand the business of comics, like why the business is structured the way it is. Because I come out, when I came out of film school, I had a useless degree, but I was interning for Playboy magazine my senior year of NYU, and they kept me on and paid me a little bit into my first year out. And then I used to work in the public relations and marketing side of it. And so from there, I was able to do some short stints at Ogilvy and Mather and Wyden Kennedy. I mean, I was basically a glorified temp. But in New York, temping, can kind of pay the bills because, the hourlies aren't bad and you're learning a lot of stuff. So, I came out of traditional business models and then, thinking about independent film. Well, independent film, again, it's really just about revenue. It's about capital. That's really all the game is. Like if you have a movie and you have the capital to make the movie, then you're a filmmaker, and then you get the parts associated with your script that can make your thing viable. Then you can get a bank loan. You can get pre-sell, money from foreign territories. There's a clear business model about how one goes about it. But the comic business model, I've just never really understood. And I'm a little concerned because I feel like instead of trying to bring more people into the medium, we just keep splitting up the people that we have into smaller and smaller pieces.
Yeah.
And pitting them against one another, and the books aren't cheap. If someone wants to if you follow 3 characters, I don't care whether they're big 2 or they're, small press, whatever. If you follow 3 characters, you're spending $20.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to get those books, and most of the time there'll be a couple other books that are not necessary to your reading experience, but like would kind of help it out. And so suddenly now you have like a $60 a month comic book budget, which is getting very close to a bill.
No, exactly. It's like it starts. If you're an aggressive comic buyer, that's going to be more than your phone bill. It's going to be more than your power bill.
Yeah,
and it's hard. It's increasingly hard to justify, and I think that's also why. And I wonder at times, and I'm complaining about it today. You get fans who see a piece of comic art that's maybe not up to their standard, or they don't like it, and there's more than just I don't like it, but real kind of visceral outrage. And I on one hand, I'm going, why are people so worked up about this? They shouldn't be. But then you go, well, they're paying $120 a month for this stack of comics. It's hurting them in their wallet, so they are going to get very emotionally attached to it.
Yeah, I'm always cognizant of the fact that people have to spend their money on my books, and I try to make sure that as much as I can that they're interesting experiences and kind of worth that cover price. I don't feel entitled to having an audience. I don't feel that people should read my work and enjoy my work because I have, the right set of thoughts. That's not how I approach it. I always looked at, especially comics, as something of a service industry,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah,
Like if I'm working on established characters, then I'm trying to do the best I can with what I believe the nature of this character in this world is, and create an experience that is on par with the experiences that I had growing up that made me love the medium, right? But when you put creative aside, it's still an expensive proposition, and part of the thing that concerns me is it used to be that like disposable capital could get you into comic books, and they were so easily accessible. When I was growing up, there were more shops, but in addition to the shops, there were, you had books at 7-Eleven, you had books at your Walgreens or whatever your little drugstore was. It was impulse buys. You go to the grocery store, and there'd be a rack, and you could buy some books there. You could pick up one, wave it at your mom, and she'd be like, "Fine, put it on the belt,"
Yep.
And it would be like an extra $1 or whatever, $1.25, what have you. I'm into inflation and all that, but I feel like the impulse buy culture has largely gone away. Now it's much more of a boutique kind of business. It's almost like comics has become, Starbucks.
Yeah.
And
very much
if
so.
It's like we're $3.95 for a cup of coffee now, and that's not helping us. I think bring in new people, because you need new people to kind of keep the whole cycle going. And it feels more and more that we are just trying to get more money out of an aging consumer base, while we're losing young people to either manga or video games or just other ways of consuming narrative, or because they can get the movies and the television shows and that stuff is being thrown at them in a way it wasn't when I was growing up. They just have little appetite to read the books after they watched Avengers Endgame because they got it already.
Yeah, they got a complete story. It's tough when you're competing. In a sense, you're competing for people's attention and time, and you have something like, Disney Plus is touting 2,000 pieces of content on day one, $6.99. That's a cost just slightly higher than a comic book. That's a hard thing to compete against.
It is. And if you think about Marvel has some trade paperbacks, and what are they, like $17.95 or something like that? Like $18.95?
Usually, $20.
That's a lot if you think about how many hours of entertainment you can get on the Switch for $20.
No,
we think about like what you can get on a PlayStation for $60, right?
Absolutely.
So it's it's a thing. Like if you think about, well, I can play Arkham City for 50 plus hours, or I can get 3 Batman trades.
Yeah.
And these things, these other mediums didn't exist in the robust way they exist now when I was growing up and reading comics. I mean, it was like Pong and Pac-Man and Zaxxon. Like that wasn't, you weren't getting narrative experiences out of Frogger,
Exactly.
But now you kind of are, and then I think on top of that, you have this weird like bifurcation between what the comic books are experientially versus what the movies are. In the movies, they have the bully pulpit of popular culture because they get the $150 million marketing campaign, and they get shouted from the rooftops. We're all aware of it. Well, if a friend of mine sees Wonder Woman, right, and really like the movie, and they say, "Hey, Bryan, I liked Wonder Woman a lot. I never really thought about Wonder Woman, but I want to read some comics. What should I read?" And then I'm like, to get that,
it's tough, and that's not that's not to take anything away from the comics or good stories being told, but that connection
not at all, not at all.
That connection is not there, or it's very hard to make that connection for somebody who came in from that angle.
And then you can see some evidence that having something that is that exists, and not in like not to replace what else is there, but just having an additive book that is an equivalent type of experience to whatever the mass market media thing is can migrate people into the hobby, and then they'll read more things, right? Look at Injustice, for instance.
Yep, absolutely.
Did phenomenally well because you played the game and you thought that was a cool world and story. You went to a comic book store, you bought the comic. Oh, it's the same, right? I understand what's going on here. I like this. I and then I buy this. And you know what? And since I'm here, well, let me go ahead and pick up this Batman. Let me go ahead and pick up this Superman. Let me go ahead and do this. And it sort of helps out. So, I think there are a number of things that probably could be done to help capitalize on the moment, because right now it feels like film to media is having this golden age, but it's not helping comics. Like, comics aren't speeding up in the downwind. And I feel like something needs to be done so that, mom and pop stores that are selling these books can really feel, a revenue boost whenever, like, Joker comes out, or a Spider-Man movie comes out, or what have you. Like that should always be like little peaks in their revenue acquisition for like the quarter and the year, so we can keep the comic book shops in business. Because if we lose the comic book shops, then you're going to be stuck with digital and whatever Disney and AT&T want to give you.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of danger in what's coming. It's funny. So you mentioned a couple things there. I think, first you talked about experience a lot. And I mean, I've read a lot of articles. I've have friends. I've worked kind of in that zone for a while. And one thing that's true about Disney is the guest experience that they try and create is really immersive, really powerful in their parks. But one of the golden rules for them is never, try and hide the price as much as you can, because if the consumer, if they start thinking about the price, it wrecks the experience. So we have to, make that world really good so that their mind doesn't go there. They'll spend more money if they don't put those two together. With comics, it really does feel like that, price point's too high. And like you said, the connection between the things people want to experience isn't there. So their minds are in the wrong place. And, nowhere, where you specifically are concerned, you came out with a Killmonger that was really well received. I mean, that book sold out, certainly in my shop and others. The demand was quite high. But the only drawback to that was it didn't feel like the publisher did enough to connect it to the Black Panther and the things that were going on. But that book was a great connective tissue to that movie. But fans almost had to find out about that for themselves.
Well, and it is sort of like this kind of persistent issue, and I don't want to besmirch anyone over Marvel.
Absolutely,
again, like Marvel is not a monolith. It's a bunch of editors and people doing the best they can.
I think overworked, by the way, massively overworked.
There's a lot of stuff. Yeah. There are a lot of titles, out there, and there are things that need to get babysitting attention, and then things that don't. And frankly, in the case of Killmonger, I think it was a matter of that book may have begun as a piece of business, in a boardroom decision. And when I, talked to Will Dennis, the editor over there, who I like very much, I was like, well, I don't want this just to be a piece of business. I want this to be like a really interesting and penetrative kind of thing. And he agreed. He was like, yeah, it doesn't have to be just like an add-on to, Black Panther. Black Panther made $1 billion. We need more stuff out there. Right. But how things are being marketed and what's going to get the attention and how press is going to work, a lot of those things are worked out so far in advance that they kind of already made a decision, I think, like, well, we're going to give this much attention because it needs to get this much attention because either it's flagship or, we just have to make sure that this thing works because it has to sell this other thing and the other thing and the other thing. And then you have projects where, like, we hope they do well. We like the creatives involved. We're going to support it, but it's not really factoring in to our major plans if it's a hit or if it's not. You know what I mean? And I think it's just about resource management, really, at that point. And frankly, it's just a widespread issue, I think, with every publisher. I mean, comics has a terrible marketing strategy. It's virtually non-existent in the terms that you would judge marketing.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I always struggle with this because I'll say things and people go, "Oh yeah, that's right. That's why Marvel's trash," or what have you, and that's not my point at all. First of all, it is a hard job. A lot of the editors are, from what I've seen, should be on, 3 or 4 books or on 20. It's not, these guys are running
Right.
around. And then there's this other problem, and I think it's hard for me to describe this without feeling like I'm throwing somebody under the bus, but you have a publisher, and then you have a distributor, and you have a shop, and you have a consumer. And somewhere in that
Hmm.
chain, it's just not a consistent thread. And if you're a comic shop, if I'm ordering movies or things kind of outside of comics, I'm generally provided with some marketing information, maybe some
Sure.
stock management. I'm given a lot of help. And with comics, it almost feels like we got to get 200 books out the door just quick. Here, they're in a box. Just here you go. Just next week there will be more. And so a lot
Right.
gets just lost in that transition. I don't know. Frankly, unfortunately, no matter how great anyone is with that many players in the chain, I'm not sure how that would ever succeed.
Well, the problem with marketing is uh, marketing tends to not give you the instant return on your investment. Sometimes
Right.
it does, but not always.
Right.
So a lot of times, what you do in the first quarter, you won't really see a benefit until maybe the fourth quarter, right? Because it takes time for the message to land and people to embrace it and the rest of it. And then whenever you're trimming budgets, marketing is usually the place where you take the money from first
Yep.
because you don't feel the wound immediately. And the same thing happens in film as well. I mean, it's not just limited to comics, it's entertainment in general. Like, well, we got to produce the thing. Those are inherent costs that we can't really fiddle with. We have to distribute the thing, another set of inherent costs that we
Yep.
can't really fiddle with, but we can find some more money in marketing, and that means that it's difficult to get robust departments developed, and it's difficult to get people, in those positions that have like the salaries
Hmm.
to justify spending the time and having to do all of these things. Or, I mean, Hollywood and music, they'll hire huge marketing firms, to do their marketing. But comics doesn't really do that. And frankly, neither does prose either. It's just that they
Right.
have a, a kind of a more stabilized model than comics in a lot of ways. And their distribution is a little different. They benefit a great deal, I think, as an industry from digital distribution in a way that comics sort of benefit from it, not quite in the same way. But yeah, so it's yeah. I mean, and so to answer your question about Killmonger, yeah, I mean that's kind of the thing that happens sometimes.
Hmm.
But the good thing is written work, books. They have a longer tail, I think, in pop culture than like a film does sometimes. If a film gets buried, sometimes things can get lost a little bit in the mix. But again, I don't blame any company for it. I think it's just part of the issue with the current distribution marketing model we have in place right now.
Yeah, I agree, and that's, I think we all look for solutions and we look for where kind of we can help. And I know a lot of fans who are frustrated. They actually do want to help. They don't necessarily know how, but they do want to help. And
Sure, sure.
I think getting kind of educated about where the problems are is a very key first step, to figure out how to help.
Well, and going back to your point about Disney, it kind of breaks my heart
Yeah.
when I see fans that are concerned about this stuff because to me, it's not the job of the fan to fix the business model. You know, I don't love that. And I'll just be totally honest with you. I don't love having to go out and tell people to pre-order the book. That you've got to pre-order the book. You got to pre-order the book, and I do that because that's the thing that you have to do. But I don't love it because I've never been a fan of putting the responsibility onto the consumer. I
Well,
always look for a frictionless experience for the consumer. And it bothers me a bit that people are brought out of their adventure, action, comedy, romance experience
mhm.
thinking about the fragility of a book before they've even read the book.
No, for
Like,
sure.
that's
It's
kind of a
hard
bummer,
for
right?
me. It is, and I think it's tough for me to see, creators who I like, and other things saying, "Please, please, please, we need you to order this thing 4 months in advance. We can't really tell you much about it because we're sworn to secrecy, but trust us, you need to order it. And by the way, if you don't, it may get canceled, and please don't pirate." It's like, oh my God, don't, that's too many things to put in the heads of a reader.
Yeah, I mean
Don't say those things.
that's a bummer. Like as a
Yeah.
consumer, I don't want to feel fear or guilt when I think about making a purchase. I just want to buy something that I think is cool. And that's the biggest difficulty I have is going out here and asking people to, you know, pre-order things and spend money on things before they've even been able to see a few pages to know if they're going to like it or not. It's difficult for me because that's just not how I approach commerce in general. So I try to be on Twitter. I try to talk a little bit about what I'm doing so people can get a sense of whatever it is without giving away major like spoilers or any of that. But I at least try to use social media as a way to give people some expectation of experience so that they're not
That's well
just hit
said.
with the barrage of call to action tweets. But instead, it's like, oh, that sounds interesting, and he seems like an interesting fella. Sure, I want to go ahead and check that out. But I don't know. I'm sure publishers would be more satisfied with me if I shilled more, but I'm not particularly good at the shilling part.
Well, I don't know.
The
I mean,
writing part, maybe, but the shilling part, I don't
no, I mean, you do well because I mean, I was going to say, as in kind of list of notes I had, there are very few authors. It's been an experience I've had where customers come in and said, "What other books is Hill on? What has he done? How can I reserve what he does?" As opposed to a character, and that's unusual. It happens. There's certain writers that generate that kind of reaction, but not many. And you do, and it's the readers are buying into you as much as the story. And I mean, I'm not
know.
saying
Oh,
this
well,
just to
that's
flatter
nice
you,
to
but
hear.
it's you generate that kind of relationship with fans, and I think it is because exactly of the relationship you're talking about, where you are trying to not just shill a book, but actually form that relationship.
Well, there's nothing worse. I mean, there's plenty of things worse. One of the worst experiences I would have growing up would be like you got a book, not even a comic. It could be a novel, it could be anything. Watch a movie, whatever it was. Listen to a song. You enjoyed a piece of media a lot, and you decided, hey, I'm going to learn more about this creator.
Yeah,
And then you go to find out more about the creator, and they're just terrible.
yeah, exactly. You don't want to learn that.
Awful. You're just awful people. They're just mean or angry or bitter or whatever it is, and it completely breaks the experience that you were having with it. And then you might be able to listen to it or read it, but it will never be the same way. So what I decided was I never wanted to do that to anyone reading my book. And I'm a person with, I have strong opinions. We all have strong opinions. I lean very left of center. I don't even, I don't make any bones about that. But at the same time, I don't try to browbeat people with it.
Sure.
And I try to keep my work away from, discussing quote unquote politics and instead discussing more ethical things,
Yeah. Yeah.
and try to broaden it out a little bit. Like, I don't view my comics as a diary. I don't write a comic book because of what I'm upset about that day. I try to write a story that will endure beyond, the moment, the month, the year, what have you. And it's important to me that, readers feel invited into the medium, and when I was, really just starting to read comics and hang out in stores, comic book shops were an oasis from a lot of conflict. They weren't a place where I'd find it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It was, you could chill. Like, you could just go there. You could have a conversation about Green Lantern or something for like 2 hours, and it was just a fun place to be. You could take a little break from the vicissitudes of society. And now because everyone is kind of amped up, a lot of that has to do with the existence of social media. I think it can compel us to be the most, kind of theatrical version of who we are.
That's a great way
Or
to
we
put it.
all need to be a rock star, right? You can't be a creator unless you're some kind of rock star. So I've got to come out here and find the most acerbic thing I can say. I don't know. Maybe I'm just too old for that.
No, I think there's an arc. It's
On my way.
it's funny. I think a lot of people who are early adopters to technology and social media and message boards and all that, they seem to have a much better relationship now with handling Twitter. I mean, a lot of the people who are on these platforms are struggling with them, and it feels like they didn't
Right.
get that skin hardening or whatever it happens to be able to handle it like a communications platform rather than like you said to go perform like a stage.
Well, I will say this though. Like, I keep my DMs open. I have people that follow me from kind of all over the spectrums. I have far left, far right. Well, I don't know how far right they go, but uh, they're pretty conservative. I don't think I'm followed by too many far right folks.
I don't think I am
You
either.
know, right? Yeah, I don't want to go that far. But I've got people identifying as atheist, Christian, pagan, what have you, right? And uh, I really do believe that the energy you put out is largely the energy you receive.
Mhm.
Now, you're always going to have those little moments, right? Those people that are determined to try to get a rise out of someone, but once they realize they can't, they kind of go away. And the vast majority of the communication I have is positive. I mean, I get the rude tweet every now and then and the rude DM every now and then. But by and large, people are pretty chill. But I always try to make sure I'm de-escalating everything. I never try to escalate a conflict. I never try to jump on something. Even if I think I'm right, there's just no point in kind of setting the thing on fire just because it can get lit. So yeah, I guess I look at it a little differently, I think. But that really just goes back to kind of what you're saying. I want to make sure that people who are spending the money on the book, enjoy the experience they have, and people are happy to disagree with me, and it's fine. I'll have those conversations, but I never want anyone to feel like they're the subject. They're the target of what I'm doing, because that's just not
Yeah.
true. Like if I come at you, I come at you from the front. I don't come at you through a book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mean, that's an amazingly long plot there to get angry about something on Twitter, take it to the book, write it, get it drawn.
Right.
3 months later, it's published and it's in the store, and you're like, haha, I got you. And it's like, wow, that was a long journey. to get
Not
that
not my
revenge.
way. Not my way. I'll just I'll say something right to your face. That's how I usually work.
It's much better. I'm curious, kind of in some comics. So, in the realm of experience, when you did American Carnage for
Mm,
Vertigo, I had heard. I think I don't recall now where you said it. Maybe it's Twitter, but you talked about immersing yourself and
yeah.
going on ride-alongs. So, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I was blown away at this, new title. It's coming out. It's Vertigo, and the amount of effort you seem to put into that story was amazing. And I know before it came out, there were a lot of people coming to the shop saying, "Did you realize he's doing all this effort? I got to read it now." So I'm just curious to hear more about that.
Well, sometimes a story requires research, but then sometimes research turns into the story, right? So, in the case of American Carnage, there was a friend of mine that I knew growing up who was a poor white kid. We were pretty close. I hadn't seen him for years, and I had gone back to St. Louis, and he had become, I guess, radicalized, for lack of a better word. He was, all right, skinhead, whatever. It's hard to keep up now for different things. Now the bowl cut is the cut, it's not the skinhead. He was old. But the point of it is, he had become extreme. And I was saddened, but also kind of fascinated. And I reached out to his parents because I knew them and said, "Hey, can I sit down? Is there a way I could sit down with the kid and call him a kid, we're the same age, but and just have a conversation. Like, I'm not going to attack, I'm not going to whatever. I just want to have a conversation." So we found a neutral place where we could meet up, and he just kind of told me how he got to where he was, and what I heard and what he described to me was the same things I'd heard from kids that had joined the Bloods and the Crips.
Mm-hmm.
The same things I heard from anyone who was sort of looking for a place to belong, looking for a place to be valued, and also who needed to get some sort of reason. They needed to find a scapegoat for what they were enduring. They had to find an enemy. And like, these are universal things. So from there, I started researching things on message boards, like coming up with like a fake name, like Double Lightning 88.
Nice.
Just beyond these message boards and really just reading until I could find something that was kind of interesting, and I would take note of that, and then I would participate a little bit, and then the conversation would go. And around the same time, Dylan Roof and the whole Charlottesville thing happened, and I was like, wow, okay, now this is really percolating. Like, we are headed to a place right now. Like, we're this violence is getting more and more permissible, and people are getting more and more tribal. And I don't see where this is going to de-escalate. The way that I would like it to. And that's when I started putting together some of the framework of what American Carnage would be. And then from there, I contacted friends I have in law enforcement and ACLU friends and said, hey, is there anyone I can meet who left the movement that I can speak to get some information? And then I would, have phone conversation with those people. And then I would ask those people, is there anyone I can meet that is inside the movement that would speak to me? And they would suggest some things. I would just do things that way. I never talked to the Aryan Brotherhood because they are not prone to talk to anybody who is not Aryan Brotherhood.
Right.
They don't care how polite and articulate you are.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I admire your depth of research for the comic, but there are limits. I mean, I don't want you going to that stage.
Well, and at this point, I still didn't know if it was going to be a comic or not. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I did know that my storytelling goal was, I had this idea about this guy undercover and the whole deal, because I always loved undercover words. Like, Narc is one of my favorite movies. It's a Joe Carnahan movie from 2004, I think. It might be earlier than that, but it's a great film. And so I had the basic kind of framework, but I knew that, one, I did not want this to be Bryan Hill on a liberal soapbox just throwing tomatoes at people, because that's probably the most boring thing that I could write. What I wanted it to be was a crime story first and foremost that explored this world as a subculture, almost like in an FX series kind of way. And in order to do that properly, I had to be able to articulate their point of view in a way that was charismatic. They couldn't just be monstrous. I had to kind of make it work on a human level, which is a very interesting challenge for me as a writer. And so I had the notes for that. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And that's when Vertigo rang me and they were like, hey, would you be interested in the 25th anniversary? We're kind of doing some books. And I was like, yeah, I would be, but I don't have any magical realism though. Werewolves that are also cocaine dealers and the FBI is fairies after them or something like that. I love that stuff, but I don't have it. But I'm like, I got this thing that's kind of like an Azzarello sort of crime thing, but I got to warn you, I use all of the words.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
they're all in there.
That'd been a fun call. I would love to have that call released as an extra or something.
Oh man, Perch, I thought they were going to tell me no. Yeah, I was like, clearly they're going to tell me no, but I'll let them read it, whatever. And to their credit, they were like, no, this is the one we want to do. It was Jamie Rich over there back when he was over at Vertigo before he moved to the Bat office. And Jamie was like, yeah, no, we want to do this one. And I was like, okay, but I don't want to do this forever. So I was thinking maybe in between 9 and 12 and kind of settle on 9. And that's sort of where that went.
Yeah. It did well. And it feels like, of the titles that Vertigo put out and some of the books that have come out, that one just feels like a very natural book to become, to be translated into a screenplay, into a show. It fits on so many levels. A nice noir film that it did very well. I'd be surprised if it didn't go elsewhere. Assuming that DC and Vertigo or DC was planning to put it anywhere.
Well, there are things afoot. Can't really get into it, but I will say you probably haven't seen the last of that story. It's
excellent.
I definitely don't write comics thinking about, oh, this could be a show or a movie. Right. Because I'm not going to ask someone to pay for my previs. I'm not going to ask a comic book reader to pay for my pitch, basically. Right? To me, that kind of turns readers into evidence. Well, see, all these people bought it, so now I can get on to the business model I really care about. And I just think that's horrible to do to comic book readers.
And it shows. People see it. It's not a hidden thing.
Yeah, they do. They do. I mean, you can tell. Like, you get something that's like super high concept, but the characters are very thin. And then in the execution, there's clearly not a fluency or desire to demonstrate a fluency in the form of comics. There are panels, people talk in panels, there are splash pages, move on. But the artistry, the unique ways you can tell a story in a comic book aren't being embraced. And so I definitely don't want to do that, even though I kind of work in all those different worlds. But I think just in my subconscious, the way I think about a story, it probably lends itself to some translation because ultimately I probably think in movie. I work hard to do an interesting comic and to make that experience unique to the form, but I probably think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you if there was more to that story and where it was going to go. So I think I got a little bit of a scoop there, but we'll see. We're looking forward to seeing where that goes. That's exciting. It's funny.
Yeah. Things may happen.
Well, that's good to hear. It was funny because there was definitely a political backdrop to the story and just kind of in the depth of the bigger story you're trying to tell, but it never felt as a reader like you were being hit over the head with it. It felt natural and organic to the story that was being told. And people say, there's too many politics in comics, or they don't like politics in comics, or how the politics have changed. But it seems like more not politics or no politics, more just how they're handled. And it just, and that we're so polarized as well, of course, so people are on the lookout for it. But you seem to juggle that very well.
Well, it's I do think that stories can be essays, and I think that stories can address a theme, and dramatize it effectively. But simultaneously, I feel like my job as a writer is to create the world, create the characters, to manage the plot, to write the story. It's not my job to tell an audience how to feel about things, And if I was going to make a brutal oversimplification, I would say you could separate things into two approaches. You have the Kubrick approach and the Spielberg approach, and there are gradations in between, right? And I think the magic of Steven Spielberg is that he knows exactly what he wants you to feel when he wants you to feel it, and he knows the grammar and the artistry to create that feeling, and you will have that feeling shared with hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people who have all seen the same thing. And there's a magic to that, for sure, and I respect it. I'm not particularly good at that. What Kubrick would do is just show you things, right? Here's some things, right? And then his work on the more extreme end of the scale can be very clinical. That's super objective in a way that can make you feel almost untethered, like you're floating through the vast space of this narrative. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I would say Fincher is kind of in the middle of those things. Denis Villeneuve is in the middle of those things a little bit, but I don't like to be told how to feel about something, especially when it's an ideology, like a concept, right? Like, very rarely are you going to change someone's mind because so-and-so decried so-and-so's movement in a caption in a panel of a comic book. I don't, that's not going to, end segregation, right? So what...
I'm sorry. It's just it's so you're so dead on with this stuff. I mean, it's funny because I'm sorry. Keep going. I'm just you're totally you're making great points here.
Well, and I understand that you get a cathartic release from that stuff, and you get people who already agree with you, saying you did a great job, which feels very nice. It feels nice to be told you did a great job. I get that.
Good dopamine hit.
Good dopamine hit, right? But I've never really found that stuff to be my favorite stuff. I mean, my favorite works are like Batman Year One, Arkham Asylum, the Man of Steel, John Byrne miniseries, Cosmic Odyssey, just weird stuff like that. So I think there can be a reductive aspect to it. Like when I see, and I'm not going to name any books and name any characters because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm targeting them. But when I see like a major superhero that ostensibly is in a major conflict having the time to obviously complain about a micro movement on the internet. I feel like, well, that's reductive. That reduces your story in a way. You know, it's like, I want the plans, find the Skywalker, and if I find that person on Twitter, like,
no, I
what?
You're so right, and I've talked a lot about timeliness. I mean, or timelessness, I should say, rather. These books in 5 to 10 years, nobody's going to understand what people are talking about, and it's going to age in the same way as kind of Where's the Beef as a joke. It will stick out like a sore thumb. It will age worse and worse over time.
And that was a real consideration with American Carnage, Perch. I mean, people ask me all the time, like, well, is this like an anti-Trump thing? And I'm like, no, because I don't want the book to be relevant because of the current president.
Right.
This book is about things that hopefully will be interesting, you know, for 10 years, 15 years. Like, I would never reduce my work to one individual like that. Because then, you know, you're dating the work, right? You're like, oh, well, that's not an issue anymore. Therefore, all of the work written about it isn't valid.
Well, I mean, depending on, so many comics are trying to key off Trump, and I get it. It's in people's consciousness, and it's kind of an easy way to get some attention. But, you know, depending on your point of view and what you think is going to happen, that this whole situation is going to either die down a lot in 1 year or 5 years, and after that, it's history. So you're definitely putting a shelf life sticker on your book.
Well, and in that case specifically, you know, what I try to do is not, again, like not go after the surface of things, but instead, if there's something that, you know, the pressman or my next door neighbor is doing that I just don't agree with, that I think has some ethical issues, I'll spend time with a story that should hopefully help people understand the reason why I might have an ethical issue with a certain action, even if they're not thinking about the action itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, because again, like, it's not about, I need you to read this and then feel this way and then think this way.
Right.
No. What I try to do is say, you know what? I think that violence might not be a way to achieve inner peace. Maybe peace through strength isn't a path I want to follow. Well, let me tell a story about a character that praises violence and turns from reconciliation, you know, and let me show you what that journey might be like, so that you can get those ideas, but you're also getting it in with the richness of storytelling, and not just me saying you need to think the way I think about this one issue or you're bad.
Yeah, and I always wonder who's swayed by that. Is anybody reading a comic going, you know what, I've believed in white supremacy for my entire life, but
I read this comic book.
Yes, thanks to this issue of Teen Titans, I now know equality is good. It's like,
I have burned my sheets and changed my ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd be frightened by the person who changed their mind that easily. I mean, that's
well, and I tell you, I think in the more macro, what we're really seeing is symptomatic of what happens when we live in a culture where we're sold fear all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? We're constantly told what we need to be afraid of. We're constantly told how little power we have, how many things want to destroy us, how we need to be afraid of all of these things, no matter really where on the spectrum you are. I mean, the most fascinating thing about the left versus right thing going on now is every side thinks they're the victim of a massive conspiracy where they're the pawn on the chessboard.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like these two realities, right? It's like you know, where everyone thinks they're the victim of like some dark cabal that has all of the power and they don't have any of the power, right? And that just means that it's sinking in, like this fear we're constantly sold. And so I think a lot of what we see in work, whether it be work that's dedicated to, you know, right-leaning politics or work that's dedicated to left-leaning politics, a lot of it is if I don't shout out continuously, if I don't make my raison d'etre these things that I believe are critical to my existence, I will be vanquished.
Yeah. No,
Right?
it's a life struggle for
must
people.
howl. Right, and I get it. Like I have to howl about this all day because the moment I stop, they're going to win because they're always coming to get us.
They're going to win. Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with it because we're kind of all suffering from the same fear, culture we have. There's a commerce around it. If a person is reasonable, measured, they might build an audience. It'll take them a great deal of time, and they'll have to endure a lot of fence-sitting accusations on the way to getting their audience together.
I wouldn't know what that's like. Yeah.
Right? But if I've been called that many a day. But if you get out here and you're just like, okay, I'm just going to make war, then you're going to have people that hate you, but then you're going to have other people that are like, yes, you're fighting for us, and then, you build a thing quicker. So I think a lot of things are symptomatic of larger things. They're not independent cause and effect things in and of themselves. I think you have to look at that and say, okay, there's a culture that's putting this pressure on all of us, and this pressure is getting released in these various ways. They can show up in the work sometimes.
That's amazing. Incredibly well said. I can't agree more. I want to pick up because I know I've taken you for a long time, and I'm hoping I can get one more thing from you today.
Oh, for sure.
So definitely going off the analogy, which I love, by the way, of Spielberg, and you're now working with Jonathan Hickman, and working in the Stonebecks. I understand that the book hasn't come out yet; can't talk too much about it. But Fallen Angels, tell me a little bit about kind of what drew you to this book. What can you tell me about this book to get people excited about what they're going to get?
Oh, well, I've known Hickman for a long time. He and I met him when I had a book called Romulus. It was an Image comic book. It was a miniseries. There's 4 issues of it through Top Cow with a brilliant artist named Nelson Blake II. And I went to the Image Expo, and Hickman was there with Black Monday Murders, I believe. And I'd never met him before, but, East of West and all that. Like, I was very familiar with his work and always liked his work. He's kind of like the combination of like the Stanley Kubrick and Terrence Malick of comics in a lot of ways. He's definitely got his own unique voice and artistry, and there's meaning behind a lot of stuff. A lot of times you can sort of peel away at something and you can find anything in anything. But with Hickman, I think there's actually stuff that was intended to be there that you're discovering. And that's great. Yeah. That's it's rare, I think, in popular culture now to have work that's like that. And his work is certainly worth, essays and debate and analysis. And so I met him there. He was very friendly. I took to him immediately. And then, we would trade emails every now and then and, try to find something to work on. And, it would never really happen because he was busy and I was busy and the whole deal. But when I heard he was doing the X-Men thing, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, Bryan, would you like to be, kind of part of this?" And at first I was a little hesitant, mainly because I didn't really know what my X-Men thing would really be like. Like it's, I like the X-Men and I've read a lot of it, and especially some of the Jim Lee stuff from the '90s kind of reboot thing. Yep. Those were kind of my seminal things. I love the cartoon and the rest of it. But I felt like so many of the things that I would engage have been engaged already by great writers, and I didn't know what I'd be doing if I don't want to repeat other work and be lesser than that previous work. But then Hickman was like, no, we're not doing those same paradigms anymore. We're going to change some things up. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting to me now. Because now I can see like a space to work in, and I was able to read his House of X stuff. It was in process, but I was able to get a little bit of it and was very impressed by it. And then we just started talking characters, and I kind of saw what was going on. I was like, well, what's going on with Quantum?
Yep.
And they were like, oh, we hadn't really thought about it. And and I always Psylocke was one of those characters when I read the comics, I was probably projecting more characterization onto her than was actually in the book.
I've done that many times. I understand.
Has that ever happened where you're like, you realize that it's all in your head, like it's just total head fiction, but you have
Oh yeah.
like this rich understanding of who they are as a character, you know? And I'm like, well, you know, if Elizabeth Braddock has returned, because I remember hearing about that initially, like the return of Elizabeth Braddock, and I'm like, what happens to Quantum? Because you know, she can't just be like a coat that gets put into the closet. Like that's an interesting character. So when that character was available to work with, I was like, oh, now I'm really interested. So what Fallen Angels really is it's a story about how warriors deal with the enemy that is peace.
Ah.
You know, it's a story about what purpose does a warrior have in a utopia. And it's also a story about what happens in the vacuum left by the absence of evolution. And it's those big ideas kind of funneled through what I believe is an intimate and very emotional story about Quanon, Psylocke, revenge, figuring out where she belongs, not only in Krakoa, but also post the experience of not being herself.
Yeah.
And it's a story about kind of rediscovering your identity, reconciling with your history, and paving the way to the future. And Laura and Kid Cable, as he's called, factor into this because these are all characters that have almost a base level of aggression kind of woven through them. They are characters that need war in some way, and readers can expect to see how they react to this vision of Krakoa and this promise of utopia. You know, and so the Fallen Angels title is, yes, it's a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge at the previous series, but I wouldn't look for lobsters in the book.
It didn't sound like it.
But it's so in addition to being like a hey, wink, wink at that, you know, when you think about Fallen Angels, you think about Lucifer.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about Lucifer, we think about an angel who was not satisfied with the status quo of heaven itself. Right. And it's about those that are not satisfied with heaven. It's really what that book is about.
That sounds incredible. And I like the dynamic of the pairing because you got three characters who are, for lack of a better word, their legacy. You know, there was a legacy character, and then they took the identity. You had Teen Cable, which is a new iteration of the Cable we knew for a long time. You have Quanon, who is, of course, you know, this other version, if you will. And then you have X-23. You have Laura, who had a brief stint as Wolverine, but all of them have had some kind of, I would say, struggle of acceptance in some cases by fans who like the character. There's a dynamic there. So you bring them together, and with the backdrop that you're describing, that sounds absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I like the misfit characters. You know, I like the characters that are a little punk rock, a little hip hop. They play the music a little too loud. You know, it's kind of been my relationship to comics, and I really do appreciate, you know, Marvel and Hickman and really all of the other writers, you know, giving me the space to do this kind of story, because I do think the book is somewhat unique in terms of the lineup because of the intimacy of the narrative.
Yeah.
And just kind of the way we're approaching it. And Simon, the artist, is doing some really fantastic visual work. And readers can, you know, see some of my Frank Miller influences in the book. You know, Elektra Assassin is one of my favorite works.
Okay.
And I don't go to that level of abstraction that book goes to, but some of that visceral sort of poetic storytelling, I think we employ a little bit in this book. And I'm excited for people to see it, because I think they're going to see a different side to how I approach storytelling, but there is a continuity, I think, of intensity and characterization that sort of permeates all of my work.
No, that sounds great. I mean, the whole Hickman and his House of X, Powers of X, this lineup. I think people were expecting good things, but there was a little bit, and not to go too deep into it. It caught people a bit by surprise. I mean, I haven't seen an environment like this that had been created with these comics in a long time, where there's a very anxious what's going to happen next week kind of feel. And so the anticipation, and I think Hickman just posted something that the orders for the last issue are exceeding the first issue. And that's definitely what you see in the stores. So a lot of attention on this, and I'm glad you're part of it. I was really excited when you were announced.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, it really is a moment for comics. It's and I can understand it because, to be frank, I was a person that would occasionally want to buy an X-Men comic and not know what to buy or how to get started, or it felt like the continuity was so deep that I was absolutely lost. So to have this broadsword event come in and tell people you can start here,
Yeah, yeah,
you can start here, and we're going to do, and you're not going to miss anything because we're doing major paradigm shifts, and I think that's a great way to get people reinvested into these characters again. So I'm glad to see all the excitement there. And all the books are really funky and cool. Like Teeny's book is cool, and Jerry Duggan's Marauders book is cool. We're all kind of on the album, with, in a different way. But yeah, it's just sort of neat to be a small part of this thing and watch it kind of all unfold. And I've been so grateful to all of the Psylocke fans out there who have been throwing me so much support because they as well did not want to see Quanon get lost, in the shuffle of things. So in a lot of ways, this book is a love letter to them and maybe Olivia Munn.
Oh, I can't.
I mean,
I
I'm
hear
just
you.
saying. I'm just saying.
There are worse letters to write. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, if a copy winds up in her hands and she likes it, that's net positive. It's good for the culture.
All right, so we're definitely going to have a picture of you with Olivia Munn at some point holding the book in the next few months. So
for sure. I met her before. She's actually like super cool. Like she's definitely. I was in a lobby once, and I was going into a meeting, and I guess she was meeting with somebody more important than I was meeting. And she came in, and I was like, I think that's Olivia Munn. And I'm like, okay. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, I don't want to say anything. She's going to be really mean and whatever. And I was in front of a magazine that she wanted to look at, and she was like, "Hey, can I look at the magazine?" And I heard her voice. I knew it was Olivia Munn, and I was like, "Yeah, you're Olivia Munn, aren't you?" And she's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay, I don't want to be weird, but I was just trying to figure it out." And she was totally cool, and we had a conversation about G4 and a bunch of other stuff, and comic books, and she's a nerd. She reads the stuff. So she was totally dope. So I can't say enough good things about Olivia.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. Well, I definitely want to, if you will give me the time again in the future, I want to catch up with you more. Once some issues have come out, I'd love to talk to you more about. I'm trying to not go into any specifics. I know that we have to let this all kind of play out over the next few weeks with X-Men, but anxious to see the issue. And there's going to be 5 of them. You got one in October, 2 in November, and December. Is that, if that's going to continue? If double shipping is kind of the thing for a while?
I'm terrible, but I don't know.
It didn't seem like. I mean, no offense. It didn't seem like Marvel knew either. Like the messaging to the store is very confusing as to how much we're getting.
Yeah, they manage that on their end. I just turn the scripts in, and deal with the writing of it. So I should be more fluent in all that stuff, but I'm not fluent in all that. So as soon as I know, I will tweet it out.
Awesome.
I will check in and I will relay it to the people because I know we are getting close to go time here, and people got to know when their stuff's going to be out there.
Yeah, I think we're less than a month away now. No, very exciting.
Yeah, I think so.
So you've given me an hour of your time, which I really appreciate. I want to just kind of ask you this kind of at the end, but you do have a loyal fan base. You do have people that come in looking for you that are excited. You've spent a lot of time on Twitter talking to fans, and you've dealt with a lot of kind of good and bad and everything else. what would you like from the fans? It's an odd question, but what do you want from the fans? What do you want from us? How can we help you?
Hmm. Well, first, I just want to say that I'm really grateful to everybody that reads my work, because I really do appreciate it. It's surreal to have people you've never met personally that have read your work, and they reach out to you on social media and tell you that they enjoyed it, and tell you what they enjoyed about it. So it's just a really great thing. In terms of desire, look, if you read something and you liked it, tell a friend about
Yeah.
it. That's I think the best thing you can do for any creator is if you've experienced something and you thought it was cool, let someone else know about it, and then maybe they'll have the same experience, and then you can daisy chain it from there. Beyond that, just be patient with me as I move through these stories, and realize I can't do everything in the first issue of Fallen Angels that everyone wants me to do. So, it might take a little bit, to get to all of those things, but I'm
I hope
certainly,
so.
I'm listening, and I'm gonna, give them all the attention that they deserve. But yeah, if you like something, tell a friend about it. Get more people into the hobby, so the hobby can be around for a long time to come.
I love it. Well, thank you very much, Bryan. It was like I said, it was a pleasure talking to you. Loved hearing all about it. If you have time in the future, I'd love to follow up with you and do some more.
Oh, for sure. As things come out and you want to get that together, no problem at all, man. I'm around. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and cut the interview here. But thank you very much.